You're the person who's supposed to be here keeping this running while I'm gone, not roaming the halls like a vigilante with a loaded syringe and a vendetta.
It's always do as I say, not as I do with you, isn't it?
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Pitt Season 2. Today we're going to be discussing Episode 12, covering the hour between 6 p.m. and 7 p.m. I'm David Chen here with Patrick Klepek as usual. Joining us today, she has been a frequent Decoding TV co-host. She's also the co-editor of LaneyGossip.com. Sarah Mars, welcome back.
Hi, guys.
Before we get into today's episode, there's actually a couple of quick follow-ups from last week's episode that I want to make sure I mention. Usually I try to save the feedback for the end of the episode, the end of the recap. But today I want to mention a couple quick things that people brought up in response to our discussion of last week's episode. So first of all, people who watched last week's episode of The Pitt may recall that there was a guy who was super into baseball and he caught a ball and had a dislocated elbow. Several people emailed in to point out that he had a recovery bracelet on and that is why probably he was really averse to getting pain medication. So we did not catch that on the podcast, but I wanted to mention it. A bunch of people did. And so that adds a kind of different layer to that character. The other major thing that I want to mention is last week on the podcast, Patrick Klepek and I discussed the ICE storyline from the episode. And earlier on in the season, there were reports that they had dumbed down the ICE storyline or tried to both sides the ICE storyline. And Patrick and I were pretty worried about how this might play out on the show. Well, according to a Reddit AMA by an actor named Joselle Mariano, Joselle Mariano played Agent Correa, 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 and talked a little bit about what the experience of shooting the show was. And he said that, quote, this is a reading here from the Reddit post, there were notes from the director on keeping it balanced. Yes, parts of the ICE scenes were cut. Not sure if this was due to time constraints or content, to be honest, but there was a bigger divide on the philosophies of my partner and I. I was meant to be the more empathetic agent, end quote. So there was a whole other subplot with these two ICE agents, and like one was more of an asshole than the other, and maybe it's like, hey, hashtag not all ICE agents, but it seems like that plotline was just completely cut from the show. So, you know, that's why what we ended up seeing was a fairly one-sided, fairly negative depiction of ICE agents.
That's what I was going to say. I was like, if that had stayed in, that would have, I think, granted more credence to the idea of like, well, you know, some of these guys are just doing what they've been asked to do.
Right.
That's fascinating. That's an interesting little nugget.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyway, that is on the Pitt TV show subreddit. For people who want to check out that AMA. So, important follow-ups for last week's episode. But anyway, let's get to this week's episode. Season 2, Episode 12. Sarah Mars, you requested to be on this episode. You requested to be part of like a few critical episodes of the show this season. And I'm always happy to oblige because I love your contributions to Decoding TV. So what was it about Season 2, Episode 12 that grabbed your attention?
There were two main storylines in Episode 12 that sort of hit buttons with me. One is, you know, Mohan's my favorite. And in this episode, we get a lot of her, but she's specifically dealing with elderly patients. And it has been recommended to her before by Al Hashimi, and it's recommended to her again in this episode by Robbie, that maybe she consider geriatrics as at least as a fellowship for after her residency, that she has a knack for these patients, that she's very good with them. And that's all true things. But I also think Mohan wants to be in emergency medicine and like nobody's encouraging that. And it's really interesting because in season 1, there is a conversation between Collins, who at the time was the senior resident, and Robbie about Robbie undermining Samira's confidence. And I think we're starting to see 10 months later, toward the end of her residency, after presumably 4 whole years under Dr. Robbie, she is caving in. That lack of belief from her superior, like that undermining of confidence, is starting to really have an effect that could not derail her career, because she's a good doctor. Wherever she lands, I think she will be a good doctor, but it might significantly change her career. And you want to talk about things that were cut in season 1, there was a scene between Sean Hattasey has talked about this. There was a scene between Abbott and Robbie where Abbott says Mohan's the smartest doctor in the ER. And I wish they had left that in, because I think it would have been nice to have one more doctor displaying like, nope, I see her. I see the value. I see that she's good at this and she belongs here. But it's like this poor woman is trying so hard, and she does have outside pressure on this particular day that is bearing down on her, that's adding to making everything more chaotic and horrible for her this day. But like, it really, one thing I love about the Pitt is that nobody's perfect. Robbie is designed to be a very sympathetic protagonist. We have a lot of empathy for him. We have a lot of understanding for him. But he's still kind of an asshole sometimes. And one place where that comes out the strongest, especially, yes, getting worse, but especially these last few episodes and kind of coalescing here, is he is such a terrible mentor to Mohan. You basically have a brilliant attending physician who has a brilliant resident, and they just can't connect. They just cannot make like a meaningful mentor-mentee connection in a way that you could see the path that will flourish before her. And I just keep thinking, I thought this at the end of season 1, and I'm not even talking about like Samira and Jack Abbott's like a popular ship. It's like the one age gap relationship that the internet is not mad at. I'm not even talking about that noise. I'm talking about like, consider Mohan as a doctor, consider her future, and consider who actually sees and values her in the ER as a practitioner of emergency medicine. I'm like, that girl needs to switch to night shift. She needs for Abbott to be her attending, because he's the only one who actually thinks she belongs here and sees that she can do this. Robbie is actively hurting her, and not even in like an emotional sense, in a sense that he might derail her emergency medicine career.
Yeah, we actually talked about this earlier on in the season when the actress who plays Samira, discussed this whole geriatrics focus for that character, and the kind of sentiment behind that character is she can deliver results in a very high intense environment along with everyone else, and so I think the character is perceiving. Sarah's cat agrees with me. The character is perceiving the recommendation of geriatrics as an insult to her, right? Like that's what we really see this episode, and it's sad that she doesn't feel like her skills are being recognized. Let's talk about that plot line, which involves 78-year-old woman Frida, who is hit by a car by her husband, Eddie. There is a dispute about who backed into who. I have a feeling that it's the car that backed into her, though. And they also do a Romberg test on the husband, Eddie, which is a general evaluation of balance, finding out that he has an unsteady gait. Their daughter, Carrie, shows up, and there is a danger that they might need to move into an assisted living home. But it turns out she actually has just a minor fracture, so they can actually go home. But the parents are extremely resistant to outside help. It turns out, by the way, that their medications that might be causing them a lot of physical problems, they're on the Beers list, which, according to the Cleveland Clinic, is the Beers criteria for potentially inappropriate medication use in older adults is a list of medications that healthcare providers reference to safely prescribe medications for people above the age of 65. Healthcare providers use the Beers criteria as a guide to do no harm, end quote. So anyway, Mohan and Mel try to present a palatable situation for them to be open to more care. And by the end of the episode, it does seem like it works. But yes, I think that all three of us on this podcast are of an age where, we probably have aging parents or no aging parents. And I do think this plotline hit home for the three of us, where aging parents often are resistant to assistance, because I think there's a pride to it. There's a pride to like, hey, I can take care of myself. Like my child is telling me what to do. Like, how dare they? And I think this plotline really does an effective job of laying out some of those family dynamics. Patrick Klepek, any reaction to the case of Frida and Eddie?
Yeah, I mean, probably everyone has a different version of this. Like, there are some things like with my mom, she's so excited to accept a ride She's like, oh yeah, you want to drive me there? You want to drive me there? Like, thank God, I never liked driving. Don't like driving then. Don't like driving now. Like, not an age thing. I'll take the age. I'm worried about you driving at night. You can't do it anymore. So she's happy to do that. But like other small things where like your life would be a lot easier if you understood Instacart. Like you could cut down on the amount of driving that you need to do or ask favors if you just figured out this app. And I'll walk you through it. I'll order it for you if it just means stuff will show up. Or I'd love to come and hang out with your kids at night, but it's nighttime and then you have to drive me back. It's like, well, there's this thing called Lyft or Uber. And like, but like I'm an older person. Like, what if I get harassed in there? I'm like, I'm not saying that could, and it all like a lot of modern conveniences. My mom is like deeply, I should say my dad passed away many years ago. She's very resistant to even exploring because she's convinced she doesn't understand technology, doesn't want to really learn new things. And so I don't think I'll have any trouble getting her into like an assisted home. And then she'd be like, I'd love some assistance as long as it's nice enough. But it's like these other parts where I could make parts of your life better now. And you can focus on the things that you'd like to do. If we just did a couple of things and you could kind of do them all from your phone, just like refuses to even engage with the idea of it in a way that I've mostly just given up on, and I just drive her around to the places she needs if she doesn't feel comfortable.
Yeah. So sounds like a mixed bag. Sarah Mars, did this plotline hit home for you at all?
Yes, very, very much, because that is the exact situation that my parents were in. Not the car hitting part.
Good.
My mom did run over me with her Cadillac when I was a kid, but like not related to being elderly. She just did that shit.
I see. She did it for the thrill.
She was young and with 20/20 vision, and she did it. But the idea of the beers list, like I knew what that was because that has come up with my parents' care. And that thing of like, none of the doctors mean harm, but they're not necessarily the neurologist, the cardiologist, like they're not talking to each other and they're just on this cocktail of medicines that it just took one primary care physician who is a gerontologist, who is basically like what everyone's telling Samira to do is go into geriatrics, just looked at the total list of medicines and went, well, we're going to cut a lot of this out. And within a couple of months, you're going to feel a lot better. And it did make a huge difference. Did it solve every problem? No, but it made a difference. And the whole thing with like Instacart, like that's very real, trying to teach elderly parents how to use apps. But there is also a curve there of as vision starts to go, those become less accessible.
I wish that was the reason.
It is a complicating factor with my folks is
sure
one parent having borderline legal blindness and sort of being resentful when there are things that the other can do that he can't. It's just like it creates a dynamic that's not great. But there was also a line in this scene that they didn't touch on. And so I wasn't sure if we were supposed to take it literally, but there is a moment where they're talking about assisted living and I'm again, like the patient names just do not stick in my mind.
It's all good. Yeah.
But the gentleman says, ask us again when the dog is dead.
When the dog dies, we can talk.
What if you fall? What if you have a heart attack or a stroke and there's no one there to help you?
And I was like, oh, because that's very real, because most of these facilities do not allow pets.
Right.
And people will be very reluctant to go into assisted living, even if it's a recovery phase, even if it's just for a few weeks or months during a recovery, because of their pets. And that is a conversation that we don't really have. And I think especially with the rate that boomers are aging and millennials don't have the money, like, if you want the decline of society, my parents were able to keep my grandparents, both sets of my grandparents, in their homes because they could afford to hire people to come and check on them and to take them grocery shopping and to take them to doctor's appointments and to do that kind of, sort of domestic assistance. Not an option for us. My brother and I can't do that. So this conversation about like, what do we do with pets? Because the facilities won't allow them. It's like, do the facilities need to take steps or have offerings for animals? Like, do we need to talk about this? Because it makes the whole conversation so much harder when you add in a beloved family pet that it's just like, that's just almost seems unnecessary complicating factor. I'm like, why does that have to be so hard? but almost all of these facilities have very hardline rules about no pets.
Yeah.
And it's like I get it, but I also think this conversation is stressful enough. I actually think the show chose to portray a very positive version of this conversation, because the reality is these conversations are probably going to destroy your relationship with one, if not both of your parents. Like, there is going to probably, unless something happens that maybe sort of silver lining saves you from this stuff, the reality is it very easily comes to a point where you start pulling rank in a way that your relationship with your parents will never be the same. You just kiss it goodbye. You just say, we're doing what we need to do, and I'm sorry that we're probably never going to speak to each other the same again. So I think the show actually chose a really nice version of this.
Pretty bleak, Sarah. Pretty bleak, but I can't say I necessarily disagree with what you're saying. And yeah, it's very challenging to engage with parents on stuff that when they need medical care, or we all need to make some really tough decisions for sure. Anyway, let's move on to there actually weren't that many plotlines this week, but let's talk about some of the other ones. Oliver shows up with his son passed out with severe respiratory distress, likely renal failure, and so they get him on a BiPAP. The whole thing happens due to a missed dialysis appointment, I believe, and in a very pulpity type moment, which again is the term I use for describing when the show is extremely preachy. It's revealed that the hospital near them was closed due to government cuts, and that's why the dad's life was in such danger. I don't know, like, this is a decent subplot, but like it felt like, hey, a subplot that was primarily just for the show to say, and that's why we shouldn't cut funding to hospitals. Did either of you get more out of this than that? Patrick Klepek, any thoughts?
I mean, in terms of like we're ranking pulpity moments, this one's pretty low on
low.
the finger wag
Mild.
scale.
Mild.
Very mild. But again, what I'd point to is it's one of the things the show is able to do as a result of the speed at which they make the show. And I say, speed without any seeming drop in quality, is being able to take something like Medicare cuts or Doge cuts and incorporate some small, like it adds a layer of reality to the storyline that I think for, as we've called them, sort of like some of the filler bits that have to kind of like happen in the show in order to get it to closer to an hour and give the other doctors something to do in between some of the bigger swings. Like, all that stuff works really well for me. And it doesn't feel, again, like it's finger waggy, but not in a way that, like, when a piece of media will put in something from the real world, like referencing a novel, like something pop culturally, in which that is going to age poorly because once you're out of that pop culture moment, that reference is going to fall flat. They're not like turning to the screen and like, and that's why Donald Trump is bad. You know what I mean? Like, there's an underlying of like what's happening politically and like the consequences of this administration, but you'll be able to watch this show in 10 years and like, who was president like when the Pitt season 2 was on? Like, God willing, we're in a place where you could like just casually be interested in what that was. But I think that's the show effectively merging its production timeline reality in a better way. And like I said, I think that's, if we were ranking our pulpity moments, which if someone in the audience wants to keep a running tally of those so that we could do like top 10 pulpity moments by the end of the season, I'd be into that. But I thought it was fine enough. And plus, just felt like somebody on the effects team just saying like, let's do something real gross. Like when he goes to get him, like Whitaker goes to get him out of the car, like, like it's like, oh man.
Oh, I mean, that was not gnarly. The grossest thing in the episode, sadly.
Of course not. No, but you start out with a banger.
Yeah. Sarah Mars, any reaction to the Oliver renal failure subplot?
Well, I do think that one reason that it sort of is it's a storyline that can be a little bit pulpity, but also a little bit timeless, is rural doctors, rural hospitals, rural health clinics. Those have been under threat for a very long time. Those have been closing for a very long time. Yeah. That's not necessary. It's worse right now because of the size of the cuts that were made all at once.
Yeah.
But that is an ongoing problem. And I do think from a character standpoint, it raises an issue for Whitaker, because it is stated his desire is to eventually go back to a rural setting and work in one of those rural hospitals. But a really real question to ask. He's in his first year of residency. He has 3 more years to go. Never mind if he does any fellowships after. is by the time you get there, will this pathway exist? Like, that's a real existential question for Whittaker as a character.
Agreed. I'm glad you mentioned that part of his character. And I think it's definitely something to ponder. There is the case of Dante Casella, 34, who experiences blunt trauma from a fireworks explosion in a storage unit with a large scalp laceration. The blast apparently launched him into a rolled down garage frame. This was the most disgusting one of the whole, one of the most disgusting ones, where his like scalp is peeled back and they need to like irrigate it, and yeah, and then something else goes after they save the scalp. They need to do something else because there starts he experiences a sternum fracture that starts pooling blood around his heart, and they need to drain it. This was a really sort of well executed subplot, but I don't know that I got that much out of it. You know, there's some interesting dynamics with Dr. Santos and doing the apical approach and all the other stuff, but yeah, I don't know that there was any significant character development from this one. Sarah, let me know if like anything I'm missing on that one. But it's just like a well done, like, oh wow, really upsetting trauma wound.
Yeah, really upsetting. Anytime somebody's head is peeling back, it's like, no, thank you. And then at one point, they're like saline flushing the last, and he's like, it just feels wet, and I'm like, I don't ever want to feel the wetness of my own head. Like, no, gross. But it actually, stuff going back to the renal failure guy, Al-Hashimi now clocking Langdon as having a more complicated history with substance abuse than just having a substance abuse problem. She had been very supportive of him up until this moment, and then in this moment she is overriding every order he's giving. She does not want to hear from that man in a clinical setting, and she point blank does say to Robbie, I don't think he should be here.
I'm sorry, what?
But it was interesting how fast that turned, how she went from, I'm glad you're back and you got the help you need and we'll get you back on track, to
you were stealing drugs from the hospital, right?
And I was accused of being flippant about his substance abuse earlier. Like, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be flippant about the substance abuse, but I think Langdon is a character, and we're starting to see it. It's starting to come to a head, and we're going into the final overtime hours of this day for these day shift workers, and there isn't a mass casualty incident, and the water slide didn't turn into like 20 people in terrible shape or whatever. So I feel like maybe I haven't watched past this point. I stopped at episode 12, but I feel like are the next 3 hours going to be more character focused? Is some of this stuff going to come to a head? Because my problem with Langdon is, he's back. He's working the 12 steps. That man has not taken accountability for the theft. Mm-hmm. He is still skating on his golden boy reputation, using those pretty eyes and the dimpled smile to get by on Captain America good looks. And Santos is just getting torched. And I feel like if people knew the full scope of that day, of what she actually reported him doing, I feel like everybody thinks she tattled because she didn't like him, because he was mean to her. I think if people knew, no, she caught him stealing and she reported him, which it was her duty to do. And it must have been very scary as a day one, year one resident to go in and say, I found your favorite doctor's son stealing drugs. That must have been really hard. I don't think she would suddenly be Miss Congeniality. I don't think she would be winning hearts and minds in the ER. Like, I think she's a difficult character. People are not going to warm up to her, whatever. Would she be a total pariah if people knew the full context of what happened? Probably not. She might get a little sympathy too. But Langdon's not willing to sacrifice whatever's left of his reputation.
Right. And I think there's this inherent issue of, if everyone knows, it will probably create downstream problems, right? Like legal problems, and
it would prevent him from.
You're saying like he needs to take accountability, but there's no way he can do that and still be at the hospital. Probably.
Yeah, I'm talking on like the interpersonal level. On the systemic level, he opens the hospital up to a massive. They would have to go back. Like, how long was this happening? How long were you stealing? They would have to trace that. They would be open to massive liability lawsuits.
It is to everyone's benefit that it is a relatively self-contained.
To everyone except Trinity Santos's benefit, and I think we are seeing her everyone is like, oh my God, the mental health of the doctors. And then Santos comes on screen, they're like, fuck that bitch. Everyone hates her. And it's like, she is clearly carrying a big, dark cloud, and nobody gives a shit because she's not nice.
Okay, for the record, I was very negative on Santos season 1, but I have been extremely sympathetic and praising of Santos in season 2. I just want
as a day one
that...
Santos truther. I'm not here for people rewriting their Santos history. I said from the beginning.
I literally just acknowledged my history. I literally just acknowledged my history. All right, so guys, there is also, by the way, I should have mentioned the case that opens the episode, right? That closed last episode there is the situation with this guy who was drunk on a golf course and then ends up attacking Nurse Emma. Dana intercepts Nurse Emma and frees her from a headlock. They use the code hula hoop, which is the code name for a hospital worker assault. Dana uses Versed to subdue the patient, which she just happens to have on her. Robbie is not happy with this unauthorized use of drugs, and he and Dana butt heads over it. And I just wanted to say, usually per episode, there's like multiple huge cases and the implications of those. This is relatively small number of cases, and this episode, probably out of any episode this season, spends a lot of time dealing with the interpersonal relationships between these characters in a way that I think is very rich and rewarding, because you spent many, many hours showing us like these dynamics, and they're really they have reached a boiling point in this episode where like Robbie and Dana have this seething, anger, and they can no longer restrain it. Whitaker and Langdon have it out. Dr. Al-Hashimi is really pissed that Robbie seems to have deceived her about the extent of Langdon's abuse of drugs. So, Patrick Klepek, any thoughts on any of these kind of big confrontations that we had in this episode?
I mean, even just the way structurally it's set up is some of my favorite parts of the Pit, which is that it's putting these characters who are, often portrayed as highly competent in situations where they can't complete their thoughts. Where like they find 30 seconds, 90 seconds to have a confrontation, a conversation in which they have to go from not saying what they should be saying to saying what they're saying to then having to then do their job and then find a way to intermix and like jump between those emotions. And I think the show at its best is like right as multiple times this is right as someone is about to say something that they should have said all along. It's like, here comes a car to like bust in. It's like, oh man, this guy's dying. And that stuff is great. And it's like the show being really smart about its structure to generate a lot of new tension from the audience. It doesn't feel like it feels sometimes like it's playing with the audience. Like we're going to get there, but like, it's just not going to happen until later, which gives us more time to have it sort of build as a powder keg. I mean, the Robbie and Dana stuff I thought was some of my favorite stuff of the episode.
Are you angry at him or are you angry at you?
Somebody could have died.
Oh, it's the ED. Somebody's always
All right,
dying.
make jokes. Make jokes instead of acknowledging.
You didn't kill anybody.
That we know of.
Because it's finally somebody slinging his shit back at him, which is like, this is on one hand, the show is laying on at this point a little thick that like Robbie is having like suicidal ideation and like, I get it, show. This motorcycle thing's about to do sounds pretty bleak. But do
you think the motorcycle represents death in any way, Patrick?
But like, does every character need to chime in on this? Which sort of feels like where we're at, because it does feel like the show is juggling that as a hot potato until it gets to the end. It feels like whatever is going to happen with Robbie, like however that plays out, is a end of season moment. I'm getting a little bit tired of everyone chiming in with their 2 cents about Robbie's state, except for Dana, who sort of like says something novel, which is like, you're being an asshole. You're not good at your job. Like this is a teach like really, and like she has reason to perhaps regret some of her actions as well, or how they put. But like there are two hot-headed people who have a long history with each other, and there's basically like no one else in this hospital can give it straight to him. Like maybe it's like who's sexy night shift guy,
Dr. Abbott.
Yes, but he says it like real gently, like, hey man, like if it's going poorly, like give me a call. Like Dana's just tired of his no, like you're a jerk. I'm gonna tell you you're a jerk, and like we're just gonna have kind of have it out. So theirs was very cathartic and also annoying because their catharsis then got delayed by just other things happening. So really, really good stuff to kind of cap off almost like a villain arc for Dr. Robbie over the course of this season that just makes as we said, I don't think this character is going anywhere. I do not, I think, Dr. Robbie's going to be around for seasons to come, but where they land the plane on him and his relationship to everybody else, especially relative to their ability to do long time jumps if they want, between seasons. I have literally no idea where Dr. Robbie ends up vis-a-vis the rest of the Pitt cast.
Certainly it's in the negative trajectory. Sarah Mars, any moments or favorite confrontations from this episode? Because we really just got a bunch of people just saying what they actually think to other people on the show.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, talk about carrying black clouds. Robbie and Dana. Ugh, they're both just dealing with so much. I do think McKay was really spectacular with that drunk client, patient, like dealing with him, showing him a level of care that I think is very warm. Well, maybe not warm, but like she's giving him a good quality of care. She's not treating him like a pariah or anything, but she's being very frank. Where it's like, well, you attacked somebody, and if you're drunk and you kill someone, you've still killed someone. So, and it kind of sinking in for that guy that, again, like she says, you go golfing and you can afford cocaine. So clearly you have some resources, but like his life is permanently altered by, getting blackout drunk and high and having this stuff like metabolize in his blood that gives him like he doesn't remember, and he has like basically a psychotic break for a minute. And poor Emma just going through it on her first day. Just really, really going through it. But I thought McKay's level of care with that patient, like trying to give him the rehab brochures, even though she knows it's not going to go well, at least presenting like, like maybe get ahead of what the judge is going to order you to do. I thought that was because, we do know from her first season, she has that kind of past.
She's tangled with the law. So,
and she's like, I think she says it's like 9 or 10 years sober herself. And she has rebuilt her life. I think what is interesting about that patient for her is she has rebuilt her life from a place similar to that. And she's at the end of her residency. She's going to be a full-fledged doctor. She's, a kick-ass woman. She's a good mom. Like, clearly she's had some complications and things in her past, but she has rebuilt her life to this place, which I think is really like promising for Langdon. Like by no means do I think Langdon's life should be over. I think he just owes Trinity Santos a massive apology that he's not giving her. And maybe he should finish his residency at a different hospital. Like maybe I know that's like a thing. It's like very loaded to change your residency. It's like a real, you try really hard not to do it. People put up with a lot. And by a lot, I mean like straight up sexual assault to stay in their residencies, because it can be very traumatic to change your residency. But like maybe that is the solution for Langdon, is just wipe it clean slate, go somewhere new and do that last year somewhere else where they don't know you, where they don't know what happened, and you can just start over and pretend to your little heart's content that you're not a bad person. And not bad for the drugs, bad for the stealing and lying about it and stuff. I think that McKay in that sort of part of the episode was really outstanding. And I was thinking about it. I think she might be the best of, at least of the residents and med students. I think McKay might really be the best one. Like she seems to have the best balance of duty of care, practice, like her practice is good. And she does seem to be able to give people empathetic care without it like totally consuming her.
Right. Yeah. I think those are good qualities for sure. And a preview of Medical Worker of the Week that we'll all choose at the end of our recap here. Hey, in terms of confrontations this week, I just have to say I'm a big fan of Whitaker's confrontation with Santos, just as Dana is the one that can give it back to Dr. Robbie. We finally got Whitaker confronting Santos with what he actually believes, which is that he thinks that she likes him as a roommate and she won't admit it. And I actually thought he might actually break through for a moment. He says, hey, admit that you like having me as a roommate.
Admit that you like having me as your roommate.
You are such a fuckleberry. Have fun with Robbie's plants.
And I was like, oh, maybe they're going to actually have a general connection. Nope. The barriers are too high.
Progress, though.
Right.
Progress.
At least he's saying it. Okay. Anyway, there are a bunch of other smaller events and things that happen. And so I'm just going to go through them. And if you have something to say about them, feel free to just raise it. But here are some other things that happened during the course of the episode. So there are some filler cases, as Patrick likes to put them. There's the case of the reenactors at the Fort Pitt Museum that got stabbed by a bayonet. Langdon geeks out about them, which is very endearing. Turns out they've been volunteering as living historians for over 20 years. There's a woman named Miss Stevens that has a full body sunburn. Looks horrible. In terms of Pitt storylines, we've already talked about Santos and Whitaker, Robbie and Dana having it out. Dr. Al-Hashimi clears Dr. Robbie for takeoff and recommends 2 attendings per shift. Robbie reveals that Langdon stole drugs from the ED, which Dr. Al-Hashimi is extremely not cool with. Sarah's already talked about that and how that manifested itself during the course of the episode. Dr. Kwan leaves after lecturing Dr. Langdon about work-life balance. Monica, the charge nurse, and Dr. Javati talk about how Gen Z bruises too easily and are super sensitive. Robbie tries to convince Duke to stay in the ER. Duke confronts Robbie about his motorcycle suicidal tendencies, along with many other people, as Patrick indicated. Roxy, the woman who died from the morphine, leaves her blanket for Dr. McKay. Santos contemplates stealing a scalpel and cutting herself. And Mateo, nurse from season 1, shows up and starts working again. So we get to have some continuity there.
Mateo's back.
Woo! So that's a bunch of stuff that happened in the episode. And I don't know if I don't think I mentioned this, but as the episode comes to a close, Orlando Diaz, a character from several hours ago, returns. He's working another one of his several jobs and experiences head trauma from a warehouse catwalk fall, probably because he passed out as a result of some of the stuff that happened earlier on in the season. So I'm really curious how Dr. Mohan's going to react to all that. But yeah, anyway, those are a bunch of the other cases that happened this week. But really, this week's episode was about some of these big confrontations and like how they all played out. And I think it was enormously satisfying.
I do
ahead,
really quick.
Yeah.
I know when she showed up, we were like, Monica's cool. Like, Monica's pretty great. Her conversation with Javati made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up.
In a good way?
No. No. In a way that white women of a certain age talking to women of color, especially younger women of color, and using certain terms that she was dropping, like snowflake and stuff, I immediately went, oh, there's Monica. No. I was like, I think we're all going to need to check our Monica opinions at the door.
I don't know about that. I mean, I think, we talked about this on Decoding TV podcast, but the new Scrubs reboot, have you seen that, Sarah?
No, I didn't really even care about Scrubs when it was on.
That's fair. That's fair. But like one of the main plot points of that reboot is this idea that this, if you watch the original Scrubs, the idea is that all these doctors who are training to become doctors are horrifically verbally abused by like their superiors, right? And it's a lot of humor is mined out of that situation. And a main plot point is, hey, these Gen Z folks, this Gen Alpha folks, like they're in this new era that we live in, you can no longer verbally berate.
Oh no!
People.
You can't verbally abuse your underlings.
It's a massive loss to society. But anyway, I guess I'm not trying to defend it. I think I am trying to just say that the Monica Javati plotline points at actual it's not just Monica as an asshole. I think it's an actual generational difference.
There is
between
an
how
actual
these characters
generational difference, but sort of like how the Mohan geriatric patient storyline hit me a little bit harder because I'm going through this and I've been through the whole beers testing thing. Like, in my own day job workplace, a toxic employee, the warning sign that upper management was ignoring for actual years was verbal abuse of younger women of color in the workplace. That's who she picked on the most. And we all saw it and we were trying to, some of us were trying to report it, but it took actual years. And it wasn't until she treated a man of her own generation the way she'd been treating young women of color. It wasn't until that behavior got launched at someone who considered himself to be her superior that it became a problem.
Yeah.
So when, again, just the tone of that conversation and the words and stuff, I was like, oh yeah, no, I've seen this dynamic in person. I know what that's hinting at. And we all thought, oh, Monica's like, I got fired because of the digital revolution. I'm like, Monica, did you? Did you? Or was that the excuse?
Fair enough. And I just want to be clear. I'm not defending Monica's behavior. I do think it is helpful at illustrating some generational divides.
I think it's a thing to keep in mind in terms of the Pitt is also a workplace. So yeah,
Absolutely.
it's a medical show, but it's also a workplace show, and sometimes those genuine generational differences. There are people in the workplace right now who are in their 50s and 60s who came up in a very different world than the people who are coming out of school in their late teens and in their 20s and are sort of expecting a different standard of treatment. That is real, but that also gives cover to genuine toxicity. And a huge part of being caught in the middle of that for my fellow millennials is sort of learning to separate the wheat from the chaff of like, what is a genuine generational gap that just has to be bridged? And where is that giving cover to real toxicity? Because that is a genuine challenge in the workplace that like no one talks about openly.
Fair enough. Great points, Sarah. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Two very tiny things. I'll be very quick. One, when we thought that maybe things had been cut about the ICE storyline, once we had this exposure to Monica in this episode, I was like, oh, like there's the counterbalance. Like, wouldn't she be the one yelling like, no, like, you know, they should have like, you know, filed their papers correctly and staying in line. Like she's a perfect stand-in for like someone who could have been spouted those talking points. Didn't happen, which is interesting. Maybe he still will. The other one is, I just want to point that people were pointing out, I think it was after last week's, the week before his episode, but when Langdon has to go in and pick up the child out of the car, as he's putting the child back like down on like a gurney, he winces in pain. And if you remember, part of like what drove some of his drug addiction was like chronic back pain that he was treating. Maybe this will just be one of those like the guy with the baseball where it's like, oh, if you notice it, you notice it. It's almost like an storytelling Easter egg for people who are in the era of like clipping through shows and like finding little things. Or, you know, is that an indication that, you know, however progress one can make in the steps and, you know, you're still going to be dealing with some core issues that drove you to that place in the first place. So it's just something to put out that I thought was, you'd never notice it by just watching the show, but then I always like seeing what people find that I'm never going to see on my first viewing.
Absolutely. It's a great flag. So folks, medical worker of the week. Let's talk about ours. I'll start today. I'm just going to say my medical worker of the week is Dr. Kwan for for forcefully bringing up the idea of work-life balance with Dr. Langdon. Hey, sometimes you got to draw boundaries between yourself and your work. And clearly no one else on the show does that. And that's one aspect of Gen Z's philosophy that I can fully endorse. So Dr. Kwan, my medical worker of the week. Sarah Morris, medical worker of the week.
Well, if this was a different episode, it would be McKay. But because the Mohan storyline hit so personally, and because I know what a genuinely life-changing difference it is when you get a talented gerontologist dealing with your aging parents and what a difference it makes in their life, not just their care, but their actual day-to-day life, it's Mohan, just for being so great with the elderly couple.
I'm just going to say this about Mohan. I know she sees it as an insult that people think she'd be good for geriatrics, but I think geriatrics is probably a very underserved field. People, from what I understand, doctors don't like. It's not a very popular field. Like pediatrics is much more popular. People want to think about the future, the beginning of life and possibility as opposed to the end of life. In general, in American society, I think people treat senior citizens very poorly. Like I don't think their depictions in popular culture are particularly flattering. And I think as a society, as an economy, like nothing caters to them really or very little caters to them in an especially flattering way. And so the idea of having a competent doctor who works with old people, I think is actually really great.
You know, every old person knows what it is to be young, but no young person can know what it is to be old. Thank you for listening.
I know that's probably not how this plotline is going to play out, but you know, I actually think it'd be great if Dr. Mohan worked in geriatrics. Patrick Klepek, your medical worker of the week.
Well, you stole mine, but I will co-sign it. Dr. Kwan was the one that came just because I don't work as nearly as a personally traumatic field in what I do for a living, but like when I had my kids were on the horizon, I did a job switch, and like part of that job switch was like a long conversation with my wife. Like I don't want to like take on like extra side projects that like take me away at night. Like I'm going to try really hard in general to make it as close to a 9 to 5 thing as possible. And that means like certain jobs I'll have to turn down, certain things that would be like creatively fulfilling, I won't have time to do, but it's important that I am available and around as I made that transition, and like talked about that with like my employers as I was like going through different job transitions after. And it's hard, man. Like, it's really easy to let that stuff slip, especially when you are in a culture in which it's encouraged to let it slip, which obviously is a workplace like this, in which like the harder you work, the cooler you are. Like, just dig in. And look, is this a field where there are just going to be times where things have to slip? Like, you have to do more. Like, there's just no other way to accomplish what you need to. Yes. But at a certain point, you also create a culture in which you just get used to it. Everybody gets used to it. And I think part of like Al-Hashimi, like saying, hey, we should have 2 attendants, it's not saying that anyone's doing a bad job, man. Like, it is, this place would be better. People would be happier if there was just more hands to go around. So I always encourage, like, her attitude being so sharp about that. The fact that she didn't walk back in and just got the hell out, like, good for you, Quan. Like, I loved it.
All right. I'm glad that is something that we agree on. All right, folks, let's do a few emails that people sent to us at decodingtv@gmail.com. Some feedback. Gigi writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. During the ICE invasion of Minneapolis, medical professionals and patients experienced quite a bit of threatening behavior and intimidation from ICE, especially at HCMC, which stands for Hennepin County Medical Center. And many people across the metro avoided going to the ER or even their scheduled medical appointments out of fear that they'd be walking into a trap. On top of assisting with transportation and delivering food, providing basic medical supplies for both humans and pets alike was a common request, and one of the ways members of our community helped one another during the worst of it. Alex Preddy was assassinated just days after the season had wrapped filming, but Renee Good's murder was 2 weeks prior. So even though we were not the initial inspiration for the subplot, it's possible our stories influenced the energy on set for the last few episodes of the season, end quote. Thanks to Gigi for writing that into decodingtv@gmail.com. I think it's very plausible. Like, the Pitt clearly, they have amazing foresight, the writers on the show The Pitt, but obviously they're also inspired by real life events. Odyssey Dave, longtime listener and supporter, writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. Number 1, the most unrealistic thing about the ICE plotline is that they brought the lady in for a shoulder injury at all. IRL, they have let people die of treatable wounds on the street rather than allow people to render aid. But I understand they had to find a way to get them in and out to tell the story they wanted to tell, end quote. So maybe that's the strongest argument for it being balanced, is that they brought the woman in at all. So, you know, because in real life, we know there's many documented cases where they literally just don't do that. Also, Odyssey Dave writes, number 2, Becca/Mel, I'm calling it now. Season 3 will have a plot line around Becca and pregnancy, either actual or a scare, end quote. Good prediction. Not bad. Not bad. All right. I think that is it for today's discussion of the Pitt Season 2, Episode 12. We'll be back next week with another conversation about the Pitt here on Decoding TV. Until then, Sarah Mars, I want to say a big thank you to you from Lainey Gossip for joining us today on Decoding TV as usual.
Thanks for having me.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.